Blog Talk Radio.
Alternative facts.
The following message is transmitted at the request of the United States government. At 12:07 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, numerous unidentified objects of unknown intent and unknown origin were detected at high altitudes over multiple locations of Earth's outer space by the National Radio Astronomy Observatory, and these objects are presumed to be some form of controlled aircraft. It is not known if more of these aircraft will arrive, or if they will attempt entering Earth's atmosphere. United States citizens are encouraged to monitor local media outlets, as more updates will follow as information becomes available. The following message is transmitted at the request of the United States government. Attacks by the undead have been reported in several states across the country. The dead are rising from their graves and are attacking the human race. At this time, it is expected that more attacks of this nature will occur in several other states in the next few hours. The intent behind their attack is unknown at this time. He has been observed that a bike or exchange of fluids is a method of transmission. This is an extremely dangerous situation if they crave the taste of human flesh. It is not known whether this event will last for hours, days, or even longer. Stay calm, as authorities have been dispatched to deal with these creatures. An all-clear siren will be sounded when this situation is under control. Pacific Standard Time, nor is detected a long-range nuclear missile launcher. This missile is believed to be headed in the direction of all residents within a 400-mile radius of this area should seek a fallout shelter immediately.
Welcome to Within the Chaos with your host, Rodney the Viking Shortridge. I want to give a big old shout out to the Facebook Paranormal groups that allow us to post our shows on their pages and helping us to get the word out about all of our guests. If anyone would like to speak to Black Diamond Paranormal Society, BDPS, to discuss your paranormal questions or issues, go to our website at blackdiamondps.org or email blackdiamondps@yahoo.com. As always, our services are free.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. You can listen in by calling 516-387-1922, or you can go to the Vibe Radio Network website at blogtalkradio.com/Vibe Radio Network. For deep within the heart of the Appalachian Mountains, I'd like to welcome everyone and thank you for listening to Within the Chaos. My name is Rodney Shortridge, and I'll be your host tonight. First off, I'd like to give a shout out to my cousins up in Ohio, Jennifer and Joe Shortridge of 222 Paranormal. If you get a chance, check out their talk show. You can find them on Facebook under 222 Paranormal.
Have your devices just randomly stopped working? Are you having IT trouble? Not to worry, Mead's PC Repair Shop can help. We also offer IT support too, including website hosting. We are now also offering full event management services. To find out more, contact our friendly customer service team who will gladly help in any situation. Just call 276-880-8900, or if you prefer, you can stop by our shop at 1089 St. Clair Street, Oakwood, Virginia, 24631 by appointment only, or by visiting the website at meadspcshop.com for more information. Thank you.
Phantom Fest 2019 is hosted and sponsored by Black Diamond Paranormal Society, Blog Talk Radio within the Chaos and Elk Garden School Community Ministry. The Phantom Fest is geared for the like-minded and enthusiasts and researchers in the fields of the paranormal, UFOs, cryptozoology, comics, horror films, gamers, cosplay, metaphysical, spiritual, artists, authors, ancient civilizations, tattoo artists, unexplained mysteries, superheroes, FX horror artists, steampunk, costume contest, sci-fi and so much more. The fest offers a unique and interesting outlook on the abnormal. The Phantom Fest will be held on November 2nd, 2019 at the Russell County Conference Center 139, Highland Drive, Lebanon, Virginia. Starting at 10 a.m. and going to 6 p.m. Tickets are $7 per person, ages 0 to 6 are free. 4 tickets can be reduced to $5 per person with 2 non-perishable food items, to be donated to the Elk Garden School Community Ministry to help families during the Thanksgiving season. Any non-perishable food donations will be happily received. Also, we will have a free costume contest for all ages. Guest speakers, returning this year, Bill and Chris Reap of Reap Investigations, giant researcher Heather Arnold. New to this year's Phantom Fest guest speakers, Dave Spinks, Ron Whitehead, Jake Fife, Chad Zumwalt and Whitney Benson, Amy Green, Barry Gaunt, Cosplay Bridget Baker, CNC Paranormal Investigations, Dennis S. Block, G.O.R.Gis Girls Heather Taylor and Micah Taylor, Haunted M.D. Donald Molnar, Lucky Belcamino, Michelle Wagner, and Rebecca Smoot. Special appearances by Cosplay Bridget Baker, Martial Arts Christian Yaya Thompson and Token Nihilist Cosplay, Arthur Stump, Grace N. Lehman, Raphael Bertiz and the Whiteville Ghostbusters. Find us on Facebook Phantom Fest, www.facebook.com/PhantomFest. Our website, www.phantomfest.org. Our email, phantomfest1@yahoo.com. For more information, please contact Rodney Shortridge at 276-970-1456 or Josh Mead at 276-880-8900 extension 1259.
Lord mercy, I don't know if that ad's getting more quieter or what. But anyway, I hope everybody's enjoying this cold-ass weather. Damn. Who turned the AC on? Man, we go from 80 to 90 degree weather and then overnight, bam, 30 degrees. Oh. I know I'm a fat boy, but you got to gradually cool me down. You just can't go from 90 to tropical, 100 degrees and bam, and it hit me with North Arctic cold. No. But I come find out it's supposed to be up in the 70s and almost 80s this weekend. So, hey, ain't such thing as climate change, global warming, global anything. It's just winter and summer merged. There's no more 4 seasons. Just deal with it like I am. Well, anyway, tonight our special guest is the head writer and editor for the Singular Fortean Society, and he's a paranormal investigator. His name is Tobias Wayland. So, enough of me talking. Let's get him on here and let him do some talking. Let's see here. Well, it's my honor to introduce Tobias Wayland. Hello, Tobias, and I hope you can hear me.
Yeah, hi, Rodney. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir. I hear you just fine.
All right. Great. How's your night going?
Well, like I said, it's cold, a little chilly, but it's going good. How about you?
Good. Well, I actually live in Wisconsin, so I'm kind of curious what cold is there.
Well,
Like,
it's
what do
not
you guys
like
consider cold?
well, when it gets down to 40 and 30 degrees around here, we say it's cold. But see, I used to drive a truck cross country and up country, so when we're down here complaining about 30, 40 degrees, I know you're all sitting up there going, bunch of wussies.
Yeah, people are still wearing shorts up here if it's 40 degrees. So
Yeah. Well, it just hits so quick. You know, we went from high 70s, low 80s. You know, even a couple of days it was almost touching 90, and then bam, all the way down to 50s, 40s, and 30s. You know, but yeah, I know how you people up there. You and I don't mean for it to sound bad, but I've seen you all, 0 below, and then you're all like, well, hey, that's like 6-degree weather in the summertime. What's your problem?
Right. You get used to it.
Oh yeah, that's just like I got used to the heat out in Arizona and New Mexico. That dry heat, I can deal with that.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, enough about me talking about the weather. We need to know about. I'm interested in the Mothman and everything else about you. So, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what started you in the UFO, the paranormal, and the crypto world?
Sure. So, I think like a lot of people, I started. Well, I got into this. My interest in this started with a series of unexplained events when I was a kid, and those continued throughout my life. And when I was a kid, this was pre-internet, of course, so I'd ride my bike down to the library and I'd read books by John Keel and Lauren Coleman and Brad Steiger and guys like that. And through them, I was introduced to the early 20th century writer Charles Fort. And, all of these writers, they helped me make sense, at least what sense there was to make out of the stuff that was happening to me. Because, it's difficult, especially when you're a kid. Like my parents are great, but they didn't necessarily believe anything weird was happening. They do now, because when you're a grown-up telling people about it, they take you a little more seriously. But it was isolating. So it was nice to have those authors that I could go to and read, and they really inspired me to want to be able to do that for other people. And so. In my later 20s, I started volunteering as a field investigator for the Mutual UFO Network, MUFON, and that was a good experience overall. I think it taught me a lot about field investigation, frankly, and how to conduct an investigation and interview witnesses, and it was a great way for me to get my feet wet, honestly, and. After about 5 years of that, I left that organization, and I was kind of deciding what I wanted to do, and so I was looking into stuff and sort of investigating on my own, and I met my now wife, Emily, actually, and she's a graphic designer and photographer by trade, and so I'm a writer. That's my background and degree and everything, and so we decided that we wanted to start our own project, to look into weird stuff, and we wanted it to be like Charles Fort. So if anybody doesn't know who that is, I mentioned it briefly before. He was an early 20th century collector of weird news stories, and so he would collect all of these weird news stories from all over the world, and it was all kinds of weird stuff, from lights in the sky to rains of frogs and stuff like that. And he would collect these news clippings, and he would write about them, and he would look at them holistically, and he would sort of speculate, more often than not, tongue-in-cheek, really, about what could be behind that. And so he came up with, some ideas like something he called the cosmic trickster. And one of his most famous quotes was, "One measures a circle beginning anywhere." And I always took that to mean, and I think this is probably the popular definition for it, I always took it to mean that by examining one area of the paranormal, be that ghosts or UFOs or cryptids or whatever, you can understand something about all of it. Because I think that at the heart of this, what we're looking at are experiential phenomena. And it's a very human phenomenon, whatever we're talking about, because the one commonality is always that human element. And so, by looking at any of these stories, examining any of them, there's so much overlap and intersection that I think you can understand something about all of them. And so we really wanted that to be one of the core principles. And so we actually just borrowed from his name and used the word Fortean in the name of our organization, which is why we're called the Singular Fortean Society. And so we concentrate on a few things. One of them is journalism, sort of in that vein of Charles Fort collecting stories, and we're a little more boots on the ground than he was, because we'll actually go places and do real investigation and stuff like that. But we like to present these sorts of topics to people, journalistically on one level. Because I think, we both know that the mainstream media doesn't do a great job of that. And so even if something is reported in the mainstream media, maybe, we'll dig into that and report it to people who are actually interested in this stuff and don't want to have to hear about it from, some talking head on television who's just going to laugh at it. And so that's one aspect. And then, we also like to do, like some community outreach, going to conferences and things like that, and overall just trying to, like I mentioned before, just trying to kind of help people who otherwise might feel like they don't have anybody that they can go to with stuff like this.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's awesome. Well, how I want to do this, I'm going to start with, I'm going to ask you some questions about the UFOs and stuff like that, and then Mothman, and then Paranormal, so that way you get an idea where I'm, I don't go any direction. I can veer off anywhere. And it just depends on what the guest wants to talk about. Because some guests I have, they're fine-tuning one area, and then some, they're talking about daisies in the yard, and I'm like, okay, we'll go that way. Huh? I thought we talked about Bigfoot, but we'll talk about daisies.
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to talk about anything at all, anything you think your listeners would want to hear about.
Okay. Well, we're talking about MUFON and stuff and UFOs. What are your thoughts about animal mutilations? About as far as the documentation, could it be alien related, or could it be something else?
Sure. Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that. I mean, that's been in the news recently. Actually, there were those the cow mutilations out in Oregon, and actually at the same time as that, there was another incident out in Florida, and they were pretty similar. I hate to use words like standard, because I think that the phenomenon of livestock mutilation is serious enough where, I would be concerned that people might think I'm being flippant, but I'm absolutely not when I say that those incidents, they seemed like what we would consider, fitting the profile of sort of a standard livestock mutilation, where you've got the, soft tissue missing, seemingly very, very neat incisions, no blood. And I think those are pretty startling. And that's my opinion for a couple of reasons. And the first one, in my opinion, sort of going back to what I said before about that human element, one of the most really striking things to me about these cases is, you hear the testimony of these ranchers, these farmers, and it's real easy for, some elitist in their ivory tower to sit back and laugh at people, who might live in a rural area, as though those people don't know their environment inside and out, and they'll sort of sit back and chuckle and say, oh, well, that's normal predation or whatever. But these people know what that looks like, and so it's difficult for me to not take them seriously when they're saying things like, look, this isn't normal. And if you look at those cases recently out in Oregon too, now it wasn't just those ranchers, like they had the authorities involved. There were sheriff deputies out there, and they're looking into this, and they can't explain it any better than anybody else. And so I guess I don't know at what point people are going to start taking that seriously, but it seems pretty serious to me. So I definitely think that there's something very unusual about livestock mutilation. I think that the correlation between livestock mutilation and anomalous aerial phenomena is real. I mean, there's a correlation there. Well, for instance, that Florida mutilation that happened around the same time as those ones out in Oregon. Now that took place in an area where this guy had seen relatively commonly, I guess, sort of anomalous light activity, so lights in the sky, stuff like that. I don't think he ever saw a real clear craft, but he saw lights he couldn't explain. He had some videos of them. They're about what you'd expect. I mean, it's real difficult to take a good video of lights in the sky. And anyway, so there is that correlation there. And so does that mean necessarily that something like, aliens or extraterrestrials or whatever are behind this? I honestly don't know. I don't know really what is behind the UFO phenomenon to begin with, so that, to point out the correlation is fairly easy for me. To make any, real definite determination saying, hey, like this is definitely behind this, I have no idea. But I will say that what is happening to this livestock appears to be deliberate enough where I wouldn't discount the idea that there was some kind of intelligence behind it necessarily.
Mm-hmm. Well, what about your opinion about alien abductions? Because I know there's a lot of cases about that. Yeah,
definitely.
Okay.
Well, alien abduction is interesting. I have talked to more than a few people who have had different experiences. Overall, I mean, it's tough because most people do describe a physical element to it, and so there is a certain sect of researchers that believe that alien abduction might have this spiritual element or be more of a spiritual thing, but I don't know about that because people do describe this physical element to it, and so I think that there's really two parts to it, because if you really study that phenomenon and you speak to witnesses, on the one hand, you've got sort of the abduction experience itself, and that is largely physical. And that usually involves people being accosted in some way by something seemingly alien. But then on the other hand, you've got this element of psychic phenomena that's attached to it as well, where then people will report different associated paranormal phenomena. Some of it almost replicates something that you would expect to see in like a haunting or something, strangely enough. But also you've got people saying that they've received sort of spiritual messages and guidance and things like that during it. So it's tough. I mean, because it seems like it incorporates elements of physicality along with psychic experience and spirituality. So it's got all of this stuff combined, mixed up in it, and it's just really tough to I think it's really tough to put it in just one box, So I can try to give you an example sort of what I'm talking about. Let me see if I can find this case. This was relatively recent that I talked to this guy within probably the past year or so, and what he was telling me about was basically he was with this girl he was seeing at the time. This was here in Madison, Wisconsin, actually, interestingly enough. And he was outside smoking a cigarette, and they saw this weird light that they kind of noticed out of the corner of their eye, and they were by this baseball field, and so they thought maybe it was just sort of the ambient light from the baseball lights, like they had the stadium lights on for some reason. But didn't take them very long to realize that wasn't the case at all, because they look up and they see this white light sort of floating above it, and he described it as like this perfect bright white light. But he said that it had this sort of like reflective metal right in the center of it. And so they look at it quickly, but they didn't stick around because they're just immediately terrified, and so they take off running back to this lady's apartment, and so she lives up on the second floor, and there's these stairs, on the outside of the building that led up to where she lived, and so the last thing he remembers is grabbing the railing to run faster up these steps, and that's it. And then he just wakes up the next morning, and he doesn't remember anything after that. And so, interestingly enough, like a decade later, he was at work, and I think he was at work, and he slipped on these stairs, and he hits his head, and he gets this concussion, and suddenly he starts remembering more stuff about this night, and he said that once he started remembering more stuff, he remembered that, a lot had actually happened between when he was running up those stairs and when, he remembered waking up in bed the next day. And so at that point, he just had this flood of memories basically coming back. And he said that he remembers, lying down in this room where he was just struggling to stay awake, almost like he was anesthetized, and he was trying to just kind of fight that off so he could stay awake. And he was lying down. He said that there were these small beings, sort of your traditional grays, really, so picture the small beings, the big black almond-shaped eyes, pale skin, and he said that there were some taller versions of that standing behind them. And he said that the smaller ones looked like they were performing some kind of procedure. And he said that these things communicated, telepathically. And, he told me that it was weird sort of how they spoke, because it was telepathic again, so that's weird enough. But then on top of that, it almost had this sort of robotic cadence. So it wasn't like, normal human speech, even telepathically. And so, he was able to understand this communication, and he was pretty certain that immediately he was certain really that he wasn't supposed to be awake, and that it was almost a privilege for him to be able to understand them. And so, he asked them telepathically because he's terrified, obviously. He said something like, please turn the fear off in me. And next thing he knows, he's not afraid anymore. And, so we asked him, hey, why are you doing this? Which seems like a perfectly natural question. And they say it is necessary. It's necessary for the human race. And so that was about all that, he could remember from that experience, at least everything he was willing to talk about. I had a feeling that there might be more, but people, it's difficult to get them to share everything when it comes to these experiences. But it was interesting because I've had other abduction reports, and they usually are some variation on sort of the kidnapping and sometimes medical experiments and stuff like that. But you get enough of these where they have these psychic elements, where they have these weird sort of cryptic messages where, I start to think maybe there's something else going on here, and I don't know what that is necessarily, but it makes me think of the work of, like Jacques Vallée, for instance, and John Keel and other people in ufology who have considered, far stranger explanations than, sort of nuts and bolts intergalactic visitors or anything. And, when you consider certain elements of these accounts too, I think that we have to consider that it's something far stranger than that. Because I don't know that. Well, I don't know what happened, to this witness, frankly. I don't know what happened to him when he, during that period of missing time. I don't know if he was physically taken somewhere. We don't have any evidence that he was. I don't know if this wasn't, just a psychic experience in and of itself. I have no idea, but it's weird enough where we have to be able to, entertain those ideas. So I guess that's kind of where I'm at with alien abduction. I think that there is a physical element to it, because certainly, there have been physical effects reported, but I think that there's also, a psychic element to it, and I think that there could even be a layer of spirituality there, at the very least, in some of the messages that people seem to receive from these entities. So,
well, that kind of goes into my next question. Have you found any evidence of human hybrids within your research?
I haven't. I know that that's come up a lot, obviously, in the field. But it's not anything really that I have, crossed paths with personally. It's interesting. A friend of mine, Joshua Kutchin, he's a writer, and he's a folklore researcher, and he's written some pretty interesting books. And the last book he wrote was about the similarities between, like, the stories of fairy changelings and modern alien abduction, and there are, frankly, a lot of similarities between those things. So, as far as sort of the hybrid phenomenon is concerned, I think that there's something to it. I definitely think that there is a pretty consistent, sexual or reproductive element to these abductions, and that's, based just on witness testimony. When people do talk about these, medical experiments and things like that, they do often have, a sexual or reproductive, theme sort of to them. And I think it's interesting that there are people, like Josh out there. Oh, and that book is Thieves in the Night, by the way, if anybody wants to read it. It's fantastic. I definitely, I couldn't recommend it enough. But anyway, I think it's interesting that there are guys like Josh out there that are making these connections. And it's not just him. I mean, like Jacques Vallée and others have made these connections as well. But, there are stories of what sound an awful lot like, alien-human hybrid experiments as seen through the lens of our ancestors that have existed for a very long time. And so I think there are a couple different ways to approach that. On the one hand, does that mean that, physical aliens have been coming here in nuts and bolt saucers and conducting medical experiments and stuff on people since, the advent of written history? Or, does that mean that there is a phenomenon that is interested in some level on, human sexuality and reproduction that sort of changes its appearance based on cultural expectations? So what maybe people would have expected to see several hundred years ago might have been, something like a fairy or something. And, now ever since the atomic age in the 1940s on, people have sort of expected to see visitors from outer space. So I don't know. I don't really know what's behind it, but I think what's really interesting and sort of what people need to be paying attention to are these connections, because whatever it is, if it wanted us to know the truth about it, I think we would by now. And so what we're left with is, just sort of having to suss out the truth from all of these smoke and mirrors to actually try to figure out, what the heck is actually going on. And so I think it's important for us to pay attention to any weird connections like that and not just sort of discount anything out of hand,
Oh, I agree. I think all of it is connected somehow. The paranormal, UFOs, and cryptids. I've always thought that even when I was younger. And the older I get, the more I'm like, there's a connection. Can't figure it out, but I know it's there. Well, have you personally seen a UFO?
Interestingly enough, I've seen a couple of weird lights. So I've never seen anything that looked like any sort of craft. But there have been 2 times now when I was out in the woods, the southern Kettle Moraine State Forest here in Wisconsin, and I was out there with my wife Emily and our friend Jay Bachochin. He's a paranormal investigator, cryptid researcher, in this area. Good friend, great guy, and we go out into the Kettle Moraine with him sometimes. He knows that area very well. He's done a lot of research out there. And the first time that we went out there with him, I want to say it was probably last February, and we were out there, and I was standing on the trail, and so we're standing on the trail talking to each other, and actually, well, prior to what I'm about to describe, there were a couple other weird things that had happened first. They're not UFO related, but I should mention them because, again, we don't want to necessarily discard anything. So, strangely enough, as we were walking on this trail, I started smelling what it smelled like there was some kind of corpse or something out there. Frankly, it was just kind of this rotting, just awful smell. And I didn't want to say anything, and it would just sort of come and go. And eventually, like Jay turns around and he's like, "Look, I got to ask you guys this. Do you smell something?" And I was like, "Thank God, like it's not me." Yes, I've been smelling it. I didn't want to be the first one to say anything. And this scent would follow us. And, it would just kind of come and go. And it was weird because there was no wind. And I actually checked the weather data for that night because I wanted to make sure. And there really was no wind that night. It was at most maybe 5 miles per hour. And we're in the middle of a huge forest. So there wasn't a lot of airflow. Plus, we had walked, way longer than any scent is going to be continually wafted over to us, especially as strong as it was. And so that was really, really strange. And then also the entire time, now I didn't feel this, but my wife Emily just sort of had this feeling like, something didn't want us there. She was really, really uncomfortable. It's one of those things where if it was just by itself, I could chalk it up to nerves or something. But with the other stuff going on, I had to take note of it. So anyway, we were standing on the trail. All of this other stuff had happened, and Jay and Emily are across from me, and I see behind them as we're talking this bright white light, and it's up in the treetops, like not past them, but like in them, basically. And I see it, and it gets real bright for a second, and then it just disappears. And so, I was able to rule out a lot of mundane explanations there, because it couldn't have been any sort of plane or anything. There's no discernible, flight path or anything like that. And besides that, it looked like it was in the actual treetops, and not beyond it. And so like that was very, very strange. It couldn't have been any house light or anything because the elevation wasn't right. There's no way anybody's house was going to be up there, so it couldn't have been somebody turning on a porch light or something. And so it was very, very strange. And then we went back out there. We've been out there a number of times, but most recently we went out there, and this was only a couple of weeks ago. And we were walking along the trail, and now Emily and Jay had both said that they had seen what looked like something with red eyes that had peeked out from behind a tree a couple of times. And so I missed that, unfortunately, but they both saw it. And so as we're standing on the trail, sort of talking about that, we all happened to be looking behind us at the same time, and we all saw this white orb just kind of appear, and it was up towards the treetops, and it appears, and it flies between, this little gap between trees, sort of like where the trail is, and it flies between them, and gets to the point where it's sort of going behind another tree, and then just sort of disappears. And so that was another unusual sighting, and I wasn't sure what to make of that because, again, it doesn't sound like any normal terrestrial object. Like, I had considered something like, who knows, ball lightning maybe, but here's the thing. Ball lightning usually occurs in the same conditions as, normal lightning. And so it was a perfectly clear night. And so we didn't have the atmospheric conditions for something like ball lightning. It wasn't the moon, because I knew where the moon was, and it was off towards the horizon in a different direction. And so those are both pretty strange sightings, and they are technically UFOs, but like I said, there wasn't any discernible craft or anything. It really was just these weird lights seen briefly, in the sky.
Wow. Well, I know you've also investigated the Mothman legend. Can you tell everyone exactly what the Mothman is, and I guess which state did it was first seen or the legend first began?
Oh, sure. So back in November of 1966 is when people first started reporting this, big, either bird or bat-like, depending on which witness you're talking to, creature with these huge red glowing eyes. And there were dozens of reports from 66 to December of 1967, and in December and this is in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, and it was in December of 1967 then that the Silver Bridge spanning Point Pleasant and Gallipolis, Ohio, collapsed quite famously and equally tragically. And people have associated that disaster with that flap of sightings. And, I have a hard time connecting them, frankly. If you read, like Mothman prophecies, you can hear you can read about how, John Keel had received some strange messages, during that investigation. He was the journalist and ufologist who was investigating this case back in the 60s. And he had received some strange cryptic messages, and one of those messages seemed to be portending some sort of disaster, and the specific disaster was, I believe it was a widespread blackout along the East Coast. And so Keel had gone home to New York during that time, and he was expecting this blackout, and then this bridge collapses instead, and he he had felt like maybe whatever was behind these sightings had tricked him, and that's fine. Like I wasn't there, so sure. But at the same time, looking at it, I guess with some time and perspective between the sightings and now, it feels like, it doesn't feel to me like there's a strong connection there. So people want the Mothman to be this harbinger of doom, or this portentous creature that shows up to warn people of disasters or whatever. And it always sort of seemed to me more like the natural human predilection to, trying to explain things, to creating narratives that make sense to us around these otherwise inexplicable events, more than it ever really seemed like there was a real strong connection between these, flying humanoid sightings and this bridge collapsing, So in 2017, then we started getting similar reports to what people had described in Point Pleasant, but from around Lake Michigan, and these started in Chicago. Actually, it was mid-April, and I had seen 3 different reports come through the MUFON case management system, and so I wasn't with MUFON or anything. I had actually I'd had these brought to my attention through, I believe it was UFO Clearinghouse, which is run by a guy named Manuel Navarrete, and he ended up, investigating a lot of these sightings with us, along with Lon Strickler of Phantoms and Monsters. But anyway, so these 3 reports come through MUFON, and they're all from Chicago, and they all describe some weird, humanoid flying creature. So you've got the first one, which would have been April 15th at about 10:30 p.m., I believe. This woman said that she was out on a boat with her husband and some friends, and they were celebrating a birthday. This was just off of Montrose Beach in Chicago. And so they're out on this boat, and she said that she looked up and she saw this giant bat. And she said that it circled over the boat 3 times and then flew away. And she said that she could make out its silhouette, and that it was huge, taller than her husband, who she said was, like 6'4". And she said that she could see its silhouette so well because it was backlit by the moon that night. And then she said after it flew away, she saw this green light off in the distance, like up in the sky, and she was sure it wasn't any sort of airplane or anything. And so she was terrified, and she made, she told everybody that they should leave, and so they did. And then that same night, a guy sent in a report basically saying that he was outside with some friends and family members, and they saw what they described as a Yakuza, which, for anybody not familiar, a Yakuza is from Mexican folklore, and it is a witch that is said to be able to turn into a large bird, usually an owl, but sometimes an eagle. In this case, they said that it looked like a giant owl, like a humanoid owl, and then early the next morning, sort of about 2 a.m., I believe, a guy said that he was showing up to work at the Chicago International Produce Market, and he saw some people standing in the work parking lot. They were looking up, and so he went out to go see what they were looking at, and it looked like this huge humanoid bird thing sort of flying around in the parking lot, and so they reportedly threw rocks at it, and it ended up flying away. And so these were interesting, to me, obviously, and I wanted to learn more about them, and I ended up eventually talking to Sam Moranto, who is the MUFON state director for Illinois, and I did a little digging myself too, and there were a few issues with these initial reports. The first one was, so now that lady in the first sighting said that she'd seen this thing outlined against the moon, but at the time of her sighting, the moon wouldn't have been visible in the sky. And so, like, I thought that was unusual. I think there are a couple possibilities there. I think one is, I mean, obviously the one that we have to consider is, you know, she made the story up. But there are other possibilities. You know, people aren't necessarily great at knowing what time things happened, for instance. Especially something like this, you know, I think it's pretty forgivable to, you know, if she was off by a couple of hours or something, who knows. The other one being the other two possibilities that occurred to me, you know, maybe she mistook another light for the moon. I don't think that one's particularly likely. Or maybe she just added that detail, because sometimes people add details because they're worried you're not going to believe them. So they'll have honestly seen something strange, but they will embellish and try to make the story seem more believable because they are afraid that, you know, you're not going to believe that they saw what they saw. And so these other two reports, according to Sam, had come from the same IP address, which isn't actually as suspicious as people think. You know, I know he thought it was strange, but you can solve that mystery with a quick Google search, actually. So if they got the IP addresses through email, now you can only really trace back somebody's, like, through the big email carriers, you can't trace an IP address back to somebody's house. Like, they don't allow you to do that. What you get is, like, the last server, basically, from that email company that this email, you know, went through. So it's not that weird for, you know, two emails from maybe the same area of Chicago to have the same IP address. I mean, it just sort of is what it is. So, but, you know, honestly, and I asked him about this, he was never really able to speak to any of these people. I don't know how, really, as far as I know, like, there wasn't a lot of investigation that they were able to do with these, you know, 3 sightings. And, you know, truth be told, if they were the only 3 sightings that were received, you know, they would have ended up in my shrug file, and I would have just went on with my life. But, you know, that isn't what happened. Just after these sightings were published, you know, Phantoms and Monsters and UFO Clearinghouse, they started getting a ton of sighting reports from people who, you know, were saying that they had seen something very, very similar. And I started covering the story journalistically. So I started covering it from the outside, and so I called Manuel and I interviewed him, and I called Lon and I interviewed him, and that's how I actually met those guys, was calling them for interviews about these sightings. And it wasn't too long after that you know, a mutual friend introduced me to him, and you know, they asked if you know, I wanted to be a part of this team of investigators they were putting together to look into this stuff. And so it wasn't too long after that we were getting our own sighting reports over at the Singular Fortean Society, and it just kind of exploded from there. So it's really interesting to me that from these 3 sightings that were admittedly, you know, fairly problematic, we ended up getting so many credible reports. You know, so many of these, all of the issues that we had, or that, you know, MUFON had, really, with those 3 mid-April 2017 sightings, they don't really exist as much or at all, really. With most of the other sightings we've received, like I won't even publish a sighting, frankly, if it well, really, I don't publish sightings if I can't speak to the witness directly. But yeah, no, I mean, we were able to verify witness identities. Like say Lon would get a report or something, then he would share that information with us. And of course, we're all we take witness privacy and anonymity and stuff like that very seriously. But behind the scenes, it was very easy for us to be able to share that information together, and verify people's identities. A lot of the time, more than one of us would speak with these witnesses. Really, like whoever was willing to do that. Of course, we absolutely would. Sometimes it could be a little difficult, to get witnesses to speak to multiple people. Not because they're necessarily resistant, but a lot of the time people are busy. They don't necessarily have a ton of interest, I think, in repeating their story endlessly, just on the off chance that it'll convince a stranger to believe them. But yeah, we were able to do a lot of the things with these reports that we were getting that MUFON wasn't able to do with the first three reports that they received. And so at this point, we've got these probably 100 different reports of strange flying humanoids and associated phenomena from every state surrounding Lake Michigan. So Illinois and the Chicago area has been fairly active, but also Wisconsin, Indiana, and Michigan too.
Oh, wow. So, what does the curse of Chief Cornstalk have to do with the Mothman?
Well, that's one that really depends on who you ask, because there are different people that have different opinions sort of on the veracity of that. So I guess if people aren't really familiar, it's said out in the Ohio River Valley that there was an indigenous leader. Oh boy. Well, his name, I'm very concerned that I'm not going to pronounce it correctly, so I will just say that it was popularly translated as Cornstalk. And so he was referred to in these stories as Chief Cornstalk. And legend has it that by the late 18th century, Cornstalk had made peace with the white settlers that had moved down into the Ohio River Valley area, but he was betrayed and killed by a garrison of soldiers when they misguidedly blamed him for an attack by local natives on two of their fellow soldiers. So, as the story goes, Cornstalk, looked on the soldiers that had murdered him, and he said with his dying breath, basically, I was the borderman's friend. Many times I've saved him and his people from harm. I never warred with you, but only to protect our wigwams and lands. I refused to join your pale-faced enemies with the redcoats. Came to the fort as your friend, and you murdered me. You have murdered me by my side. For this, by my side, my young son. For this, may the curse of the Great Spirit rest upon this land. May it be blighted by nature. May it even be blighted in its hopes. May the strength of its people be paralyzed in the stain of our blood. So that was me reading verbatim what is usually put in these legends. I mean, I don't know how seriously people take that. It almost sounds like a racist caricature to me of how somebody would, portray like a Native American. But anyway, since that time, that area is it's supposed to have been cursed. People say that the Ohio River Valley suffers from a number of unusual disasters. So everything from coal mines collapsing to fires to explosions to plane crashes to all of these different disasters have been blamed on Cornstalk's curse. And to me personally, I'm of the opinion that people blame these disasters on this legendary curse for the same reason that people wanted to connect Mothman to the Silver Bridge. It makes sense of it. It's a narrative that people can apply to make sense of something that is horrible and tragic and frankly just random and unpredictable. And so I think it helps people after the fact to look for anything at all that they can do or point to to find some causality, to find some reason behind it, to find some reason why it happened. And so I mean, I don't think necessarily that this curse is a real curse, because I think that we don't necessarily have a lot of evidence that this story happened as it is said to. I think more than anything, it's just sort of a way for people to try to make sense of horrible tragedies, honestly.
Well, I know when it comes to the Mothman stories and legends, it has a lot of different pieces, and another piece is like the TNT bunkers there. How does that fit into the whole Mothman story?
Oh, sure. So you've got those the TNT area. I think is what you are referring to out there. So that was the sighting of one of the that was the site of one of the earliest sightings back in 66. And so it's an area that has it's gained fame because of that sighting. The area itself isn't necessarily special. I mean, it's an old TNT area that's outside of Point Pleasant. It was used by the Department of Defense to create dynamite, for World War II from 1942 to 1945. And that process it's highly toxic, and that entire area, like the processing facilities, the industrial wastewater disposal system, it's all contaminated. And so it was decommissioned and reportedly decontaminated in 45, at which point the U.S. Government deeded it to West Virginia, and they turned it into the state wildlife management area. And then as recently as 1981, there was liquid waste that was produced during that TNT manufacturing process observed near a pond in the wildlife preserve. And so the EPA had to come in and state investigators revealed that the groundwater and surface water were actually still contaminated from the TNT creation process, and to this day it's listed as toxic. I think the government is still trying to clean it up, but who knows? And so I think that has added to the mystique of that area for a couple of different reasons, actually. One, because it was this abandoned TNT area. Not a lot of people hung out there. It's not like it was a real busy area. So it was someplace that people could go, that kids could go, because this is a small town in West Virginia. And, I'm not from there, but I am from a different small town, and they're not so different, honestly, from one small town to another across the U.S., I think. And so, I remember when I was a kid, and that's what you would do. Like, you would find a place out in the country, you would go cruise out there, you'd hang out with your friends, whatever. And this was that kind of area, and so, relatively isolated, a place, kids could go or whatever. And then on top of that, you've got this lingering toxicity, like this deadly poisonous aspect to it as well. So I think it's easy to see why people would ascribe significance to an area like that. It's a creepy place. I don't know that it being an abandoned TNT area has anything to do with Mothman necessarily. I could only guess at the actual creature's motivations. I think that a commonality that you see among these reports, though, is cryptids, monsters, whatever, ghosts, and heck, even when people see UFOs and their occupants and stuff, it's almost always in area like this, these sort of in between places, like these liminal areas that are close enough to civilization, in this case like a small town, where people can get to them, but still isolated enough where when weird stuff happens, there are only a few witnesses, and it ends up being difficult to investigate. And that's the TNT area. So yeah, I don't know that there's really any more connection than that. And again, I don't know that it being a TNT area is itself significant in any way. More so than that, it really just represents this sort of spooky, isolated area where stuff like this seems to happen.
Oh yeah, well, that makes a lot of sense. Well, I hope I'm not going to tear his name up, but I'm going to try to pronounce it. Who is Indrid Cold?
Oh, Indrid Cold. Yeah, sure. So, now that was connected to those old sightings back in the 60s, and that was connected to a UFO sighting. I'm trying to remember the name of the guy. It was Woodrow Derenberger, I believe, was approached on a highway, and this was a case that Keel had investigated. So now, this isn't anything that I had actually investigated myself. So this is just sort of going off of memory, but yeah, he was sort of a spooky figure that would that popped up a couple of times in reports while John Keel was investigating those, 1966 to 67 Mothman sightings. So you basically had this guy who was returning home one night, and he's driving on the highway in West Virginia, and he sees this UFO, sort of a cigar-shaped craft, and he says that this thing landed, it was right in his way, and so he had to slow down, and he stops on the side of the road, and he said that at that point, after he has to kind of pull over and stop, that he's approached by this guy who looked just like a normal guy, just an ordinary guy, average height, in his mid-30s, and he was wearing a sort of glossy, metallic blue coat, like a dark blue coat. And when he talked to him, he spoke telepathically, so his mouth didn't move, and he had just like this weird smile on his face the whole time. So you might hear people refer to Indrid Cold as the grinning man sometimes too. And so he tells him that his name is Indrid Cold, and he tells him that he doesn't mean him any harm. And basically they have this telepathic conversation where Cold he tells him a bunch of just weird, seemingly banal information, where he just describes, his species or whatever you want to call it as being very similar to humans, and just whatever, just very sort of unimportant stuff, really. And then he was like, okay, well, we will see you again. And he goes back and gets into his UFO and like that, and that's the end of it. He takes off. And so, people have made a lot of connections between Indrid Cold and the other phenomenon, like the Mothman phenomenon. Because, there were a lot of UFO sightings. There have always been a lot of cryptid sightings, Bigfoot, like you name it, in that Ohio River Valley. And so, John Keel, he was really heavily inspired by Charles Fort, and so he would take that same approach of looking at things holistically. So, if he had, this weird UFO occupant report, like he would have to consider its connection to everything else happening. And so, I don't know that we have any real concrete connection, but if memory serves, really this is sort of used by Keel as a demonstration of what he would refer to as ultra-terrestrials. And so sort of the idea behind ultra-terrestrials is that there is this species of others, you can call them aliens, you can call them whatever you want, but this species that essentially shares like this planet with us and has possibly forever, seemingly since the advent of written history, and they are capable of manipulating human consciousness at the very least, if not more material reality as well. But they're able to manipulate things in such a way as to appear basically as whatever they want, and to make us see or experience things that may not be true to the actual reality of what's happening. And so in the case of like Indrid Cold, I think that sort of Keel's idea was that who knows what was actually going on there, because the idea that this cigar-shaped craft would just land in the middle of the road, and a guy, just a normal-looking guy, would get out and talk to this guy who's pulled over on the side of the road, talking about how, hey, us space people eat the same stuff as you and breathe the same as you, having this telepathic conversation with the guy about these relatively mundane subjects, and then just, be like, okay, well, see you later, and then get in this craft and fly away. It's so ridiculous that you can't believe that any intergalactic traveler would do something like that, because it makes so little sense. But at the same time, we're left with these witnesses who, seem to be trying their very best to express their experience, authentically. And so, I mean, we're left in a situation of trying to explain the inexplicable, because none of it just really makes very much sense. And so I think that that's how Indrid Cold mostly ties into the Mothman story, is sort of as an example of the kind of high strangeness that is associated with certain areas, like in this case the Ohio River Valley.
Well, what's your opinion about UFOs actually coming from space or a different time, or even the center of the earth, or under the ocean?
Sure. It's difficult to really say. I'm not one of those guys who's going to sit there and tell anybody I know where UFOs are coming from, because I definitely don't. And I don't think anybody else really does either. As far as UFOs coming from space, I'll tell you, when I first started out, I was a pretty staunch materialist. Like, I really thought that the nuts and bolts explanation made the most sense. Now, I was a big fan of Stanton Friedman, and I always remained a fan of Stanton Friedman as a person, because he was a great guy. I was able to meet him a few times and hang out with him just a little bit, and he was fantastic. But honestly, a lot of the things that he said and that he would write about, because he was very knowledgeable, about physics, and he worked out some ways where it made a certain amount of sense, and it seemed theoretically possible that space travel could be achieved between vast distances a little more easily than I think a lot of people, or I should say a lot of mainstream scientists will give the idea credit for. But sort of as time went on, I investigated more on my own and considered my own experiences and things. I had to start taking into account all of the other weird stuff, all of the injured colds, as it were, that just didn't lend themselves very well to that kind of explanation. And so at this point, as far as, UFOs actually coming from outer space, maybe, because obviously the other possibility there is if, any race is advanced enough to get here from, wherever, then they're probably advanced enough to, perform the kinds of manipulations that, that Gil was talking about when he would talk about his like ultra-terrestrials and stuff. So, who knows? Maybe all that weird stuff is just screen memories from nuts and bolts saucer, people with just really advanced technology. I can't prove that it isn't, and I can't prove that, any of the other various hypotheses are true. So, I think we have to allow it as a possibility, but in my mind at this point, not only is it not the only possibility, but I think that it's, at best, tied for first place with some other strong contenders. As far as, like time travel, that's another popular explanation for UFOs. And that's another one, where we're left in sort of the same position, excuse me, of really not having any way of telling necessarily, if that's the case or not. Now, I know people have come out with various stories and various different witness accounts to sort of back that up. And I'm reminded actually of there's a book that came out relatively recently, Identified Flying Objects, a multidisciplinary scientific approach to the UFO phenomenon. And it was written by a Montana Tech professor of anthropology, Dr. Michael Masters. And in that book, he actually posited that UFO occupants were our distant descendants, and that they were, coming back in time, and that, they were coming back in time to study us, in their own evolutionary past. So, considering he's an anthropology professor, he's looking at this anthropologically, like what he would do if he had a time machine, basically, which would be to go, way back to the earliest origins of mankind, and watch us, develop and evolve and form culture and all of this other stuff. And so part of his reasoning was the description of UFO occupants, because now there are a lot of weird descriptions from, if you go way back to like the 40s and 50s and 60s, there are a lot, of pretty strange descriptions of UFO occupants. But I think we all know most recently what has gained the most popularity has been sort of the traditional, what people call gray alien, although, you also have, Nordics, reptilians, things like that. But something that they all have in common, at least these more modern descriptions, is they're all bipedal. They're all, they've got like a bilateral symmetry. So they've got, two eyes, a mouth, a nose, or at least a couple of, nostrils or something. They've usually got 2 arms and 2 legs. The point is, they mirror the most important aspects of like our own appearance. Like they have the same level of variation as like the aliens, like the various alien species on like the old Star Trek show. It's just people in makeup, and so that's his reasoning. Is that okay? Well, you've got these attributes that are fairly similar to our own. What are the odds of those, evolving out in space somewhere and then showing up here? So maybe, what we're looking at is our own distant descendants come back to sort of study us, anthropologically. I have a few issues with that, frankly. One, which I've already mentioned, if you've been looking at accounts of UFO occupants long enough, you'll know that a lot of them have been described very, very, strangely, and they've run the gamut really into some just really bizarre stuff like intelligent, like mobile, like brains and intelligent myths and all kinds of weird stuff. And it was really relatively recently, I think, that it kind of coalesced these accounts have coalesced into the narrative that we have now of alien grays and stuff. And I think that there could be a couple of reasons for that. And really, what all of those potential reasons have in common, I think, is some element of manipulation, basically, where maybe the narrative is changing based on our cultural expectations, which I know I've mentioned. Maybe it's changing, based on some prescribed narrative that's being sort of deliberately forced on us. I have no idea, but yeah, I mean, I just think that this Professor Masters probably only has a very modern, last 30, 40 years at the most, knowledge of the UFO phenomenon, which is why he thinks that all UFO occupants share these necessarily humanoid attributes and always have. But and actually, if I may, when I say the narrative has changed according to our cultural expectations, I don't mean that in a way that maybe like a traditional folklorist would, where they kind of just think it's just people making up stories, and so when they're making up the story, they have it kind of fit whatever the last sci-fi movie they watched was. I don't mean it like that at all. And really, rather, what I would be referring to is sort of the same idea, rather, that Keel had when he would talk about the manipulations by these ultra terrestrials, where maybe what they were doing was feeding us a story based on our own cultural expectations. So, once we split the atom, and it's the 1940s, and now we're looking to get into space and stuff, suddenly whatever it is we're dealing with changed, the narrative to fit that cultural expectation. Like, we weren't looking for fairies anymore. We were looking outward, and so that's the that's the appearance that this, phenomenon chose to take after that. Anyway, that's one theory. And so, yeah, as far as unidentified submerged objects, I think they're definitely a thing. They're pretty widely reported, and often, people will actually report, seeing something, either coming or going out of the actual ocean. So it definitely seems like whatever we're talking about, flying around in the atmosphere is equally capable of flying around underwater, which I don't think should necessarily come as any surprise to anybody, honestly. Really just from the nuts and bolts perspective, if you think about what people sort of have speculated, might be driving these ships, like what the actual physics behind their locomotion would have to be. You get guys like Bob Lazar talking about folding gravity, basically. And so, or directing these gravity waves or whatever, and yeah, I don't know why that wouldn't work with the ocean as well as it would the atmosphere, and so that makes a certain amount of sense. And then if you're talking about something weirder, then yeah, of course, it could probably do anything. So I think the other part of that is, sort of considering if, let's say you wanted to maintain, a presence on the Earth, just for the sake of speculation, and you wanted to do it outside of where anybody could see you, I think the ocean would be as good a place as any, as you could find, honestly, and so, yeah, I mean, people report seeing stuff, going in and out of the ocean, well, like I said, fairly frequently. So, leads me to believe that there's something going on there. I don't know what it is necessarily, but there is definitely some kind of connection.
I agree. The Men in Black, did they have any influence over any of what was going on with the Mothman at the time in the 60s, or even today with all the other UFO sightings? I know it's, a lot of people have reported them, but I've noticed here lately haven't really heard much about them.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like you hear as much about Men in Black sightings anymore, does it? Now, I know that, yeah, I mean, there were some reports back in the 60s in Point Pleasant of some strange men coming around, basically. And what was sort of weird about them is, they would show up and they just looked kind of off for that area. And they would act strangely, they would seemingly not recognize how, just normal items work, excuse me, you could hand them a pen or something and they would just sort of be baffled at what that was. There are a lot of different sort of theories behind that. I think the modern one that's been popularized, obviously by films like Men in Black and stuff, is that there's some sort of secretive government agency that's sort of going around and trying to convince people not to talk about UFOs and stuff. And that was another part of this, even back then, is these weirdos would show up, and they would speak, very robotically and strangely, and they would just kind of look a little off, and they wouldn't seem to recognize normal household objects. And, they would just sort of threaten you and tell you not to talk about whatever UFO sighting you had, or not to look into UFOs or whatever. And then that would be it. And if you just continue doing what you were doing, pretty much nothing seemed to come of it, and no harm seemed to befall you as a result. But yeah, that doesn't sound like, people from the U.S. government to me. So again, like I know that's been popularized, but if you look at, accounts of people interacting with the so-called Men in Black, they don't even appear to be human, frankly. I have a lot of difficulty imagining a human being acting like that. And so, yeah, it wasn't. Also, of course, you've got it wasn't too long before people, started talking about Men in Black, that you had things like, Project Sign and Project Grudge and then Project Blue Book. And so, there were government people that would show up and, question people about UFOs, and sometimes they weren't completely honest about it. And then you even have the more sort of like traditional spooks, like if you look at Richard Doty with the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, and sort of what he did to Paul Benowitz back in the early 80s, and all of the weird mind games he was playing. There's a government element to it, but when you really get to the traditional sort of Men in Black stories, which involve, again, like these weird looking people that often will speak strangely, maybe they'll have like a robotic sort of speech or whatever, and they'll act very oddly, not recognizing normal things, and oftentimes they'll show up in older model cars that look brand new. They're supposedly like always black. And it would be difficult for me to say that that is connected to the government. It definitely seems more in line with the stranger phenomena, so I would be more inclined to say that the connection there is with the UFO phenomenon in some way, and not and not the government necessarily trying to silence people. And it actually seems like when the government does try to silence people, it's not usually by showing up at their house and telling them to shut up. It's usually by discrediting them, and so they'll they might try to make you look crazy, or well, that was in the case of Paul Benowitz and Richard Doty, where he just kind of led this guy on a wild goose chase, and ended up making him look very, very foolish, basically ruined his life. And that's really more of the way that the government seems to approach handling, people who get, maybe too close to the truth or too interested in something that they don't want you to know about. So yeah, I guess my point was, I think that the Men in Black is connected to these phenomena directly. And so it's almost, well, I would say, frankly, that they are an offshoot of phenomena. So, be that UFOs or Mothman or whatever, which I think are probably all connected in some way.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever been to the Mothman Festival that they have each year at Point Pleasant, West Virginia?
Oh, no, I'm still waiting for them to invite me. So if anybody from there is listening, get a hold of me. I'd love to come, talk about my new book and everything that's been happening around Lake Michigan.
I'll tell you what, next year when we have a Phantom Fest, I'm going to invite you down to our neck of the woods if you want to come down and speak. Because I know people around here really enjoy the guests that I've been having to come down as far as speaking about giants, UFOs, paranormal, so forth. Like I said, you talk about small town. I live in a small town, and a lot of people around here, they're so fascinated with all this stuff, but they think I'm crazy for even being involved in it. But when I bring it into them, they're just sitting there like, "Wow, thank you."
Yeah, I mean that sounds great, and it's funny that you mentioned that too, because that isn't that all. That is so true. Honestly, I like to tell people that basically anybody I've ever met is only about 3 beers away from telling me about a ghost or a UFO they saw or something weird, because so many people, just normal people, have these kinds of weird experiences. It's not. It literally is like most of the people with whom I speak. When I'm investigating whatever, like they're literally just normal people. Like they could be in your church congregation, they could work in your office, you might pass them at the grocery store, you wouldn't look at them twice. You wouldn't, and also the number one thing that I hear from pretty much every witness that I've ever spoken to is how thankful they are that they finally found somebody who will listen to them, which is crazy because it seems like enough people have these experiences that they should have been somewhat normalized by now. But, without going off on a huge tangent, I definitely think that there's some sort of concentrated effort to ridicule these stories, to keep them underground so people don't talk about them, because they happen with enough frequency that they should be a lot more normal than they are, and people should be able to talk about them. But anyway, what usually happens, is I'll talk to somebody and they'll say how grateful they are to find, to found the Singular Fortean Society and be able to talk about their experience. Because what usually happens is, especially with like the monster sightings, which are even more like the Mothman stuff, like that's more fringe even than like UFOs and ghosts and stuff. And so they'll have their experience, and maybe they'll tell a loved one, like a family member or a close friend or something, and they'll get laughed at. And that's the last time they talk about it until they find somebody like me. Like I was talking to a lady earlier tonight, and she had seen something. She was driving with her son. This was in northern Illinois, and she's driving with her son one night, and they see off on the side of the road this creature with these like glowing red eyes, and she didn't make out a lot of detail, but she could tell that it was sort of roughly humanoid shaped, and it was moving in a way where it was sort of bobbing up and down. So it looked like it could have been almost if you can picture something like floating, bobbing up and down. It was moving almost like that, and it was kind of hunched over. And again, she saw these glowing red eyes, and her son saw it too. And he freaked out a little bit, understandably. And it's funny. She went and she told some people, of course. She told her husband and stuff, and they were kind of making fun of him. making fun of her and her son about it. And then, interestingly enough, I always ask everybody this, when I'm interviewing them. And I asked her, of course, I said, have you ever experienced anything paranormal before or since? And she told me that, their family had experienced, what people would describe as a haunting, and she said, it was mostly sort of centered around her son, but her husband had also experienced some of it. Like, he experienced like a ghostly presence, like sitting on the bed and stuff. And I didn't say anything because I don't know these people that well, but I'm thinking the whole time, I'm like, hold on a sec. So he laughed at you when you're talking about this creature sighting, but he had a ghost sit on his bed. Like, that's how crazy this is, where these creature sightings, like, that's super fringe stuff, but like the ghosts and stuff, that is becoming normal enough, I think, where people will just accept it, which is great. But frankly, we should be there with everything by now. Like, you shouldn't have people who have seen a ghost laughing at somebody who's seen a monster or something. I mean, I don't find one any more ludicrous than the other, frankly.
Oh, I agree. Well, we're just about out of time, sir, and I appreciate you coming on the show. And I got to get you back on so we can talk more about the paranormal. I'm sorry I didn't get to there, but once I start talking, get somebody talking about the UFOs and Mothman or anything Men in Black, I'm just kind of stopped there. I know. See, that's what I love. I give guys like you, and I'll just sit there and I'll just listen. And I'm like, I got a question, and then another hour goes by, and I'm like, I got another question. I love it because I learned so much from you all, and it is truly amazing. But the last thing before we go, what are your plans for the rest of 2019? And do you have any projects that that you're willing to talk about, that you're working on, or anything that you can discuss?
Oh, yeah.
And as far as get in touch with you, website, Facebook, or whatever, all that good stuff.
Yeah, definitely. So we are actually done with conferences for this year as of right now. If that changes, we'll update everybody on social media. If you want to follow us, you want to look for the Singular Fortean Society, and our website URL is just singularfortean.com. You can find us on social media. We're on everything. So Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, Instagram. Just look for the Singular Fortean Society. And as far as upcoming projects, I do have a book coming out this year. It's called The Lake Michigan Mothman, Hide Strangeness in the Midwest. And it's going to talk about basically, our experience investigating these Mothman sightings around Lake Michigan. From 2017, all the way up to 2019. But then we also got a bunch of historical sightings, which go all the way back to like the 1960s. So if you're interested in that, pre-orders for the book start on Halloween and go through November 15th. If you pre-order, you will get a signed copy along with a 18 by 24 inch poster of the cover. I think the cover looks great. So check it out. Hopefully that is an incentive. Otherwise, it'll be available through Amazon December 1st. If you are interested in pre-ordering, you can do that through our website, again, starting on Halloween. So if you go to singularfortean.com/books, you will find info on there about that. And I think that about covers it.
Okay. Well, like I said, I'd like to have you back on the show sometime early next year if you're good for that, and I'll work you up some dates and stuff and send to you. But Mr. Wayland, it has been an honor and a privilege to have you on the show, sir.
Well, thank you so much. This has been great. I really appreciate it, and yeah, I'd love to come back on. So we will definitely set that up.
Okay. And next time, people will talk about ghosts. I promise. I promise. I'll stay away from the UFOs. I promise. Well, sir, you have a great night, a great weekend, and the upcoming holidays. I hope it's bright and merry for you.
Yeah, you too. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, sir. You have a good night.
All right. Take care.
Okay, bye-bye. Well, I want to thank Mr. Wayland for coming on the show. You know, like I said, I have nothing but respect for him and the job that him and other researchers like he does with the UFOs and the cryptids and so forth. Oh, love it. But we'll work something out, and next time we'll talk about ghosts. So next week, we're going to be talking about UFOs again. Next Thursday night, October 24th, a special guest will be author and R.H. theorist, ufologist, and founder and CEO of a new nonprofit organization, UFO Hunters of America, Melissa Kennedy. I tried to have her on a couple weeks ago, and it didn't work out. I had the Blog Talk had a problem, not me. So everyone, like I said, have a great night, great weekend, nothing but love, and let's enjoy this weekend. Party on, party on. I guess I better turn this thing on before I say it, right? That's it for us tonight. I want to thank everyone that took the time to listen in. I'd like to give a big shout out to the Vibe Radio Network and to Ryan for putting up with us. Also to all the first responders and our men and women in the armed services, thank you for your service and the sacrifices that you and your families make every day to keep our great nation safe. Tune in next week to another exciting show starting at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Everyone can go to our Facebook page Within the Chaos, and don't forget to like our page to see upcoming guests along with past shows, postings, or you can also go to my website at www.blackdiamondps.org or blogtalkradio.com/Vibe Radio Network. Also, we have a YouTube channel, so go to YouTube, look up Within the Chaos for past shows. Thanks again. Until next week, everyone have a safe weekend and have a good night. And love you all. Be careful out there.
I'm sorry. But I don't want to be an emperor. That's not my business. I don't want to rule or conquer anyone. I should like to help everyone if possible. Jew, Gentile, black man, white. We all want to help one another. Human beings are like that. We want to live by each other's happiness, not by each other's misery. We don't want to hate and despise one another. In this world, there's room for everyone, and the good earth is rich and can provide for everyone. The way of life can be free and beautiful, but we have lost the way. Greed has poisoned men's souls, has barricaded the world with hate, has goose-stepped us into misery and bloodshed. We have developed speed, but we have shut ourselves in. Machinery that gives abundance has left us in want. Our knowledge has made us cynical. our cleverness hard and unkind. We think too much and feel too little. More than machinery, we need humanity. More than cleverness, we need kindness and gentleness. Without these qualities, life will be violent, and all will be lost. The aeroplane and the radio have brought us closer together. The very nature of these inventions cries out for the goodness in men, cries out for universal brotherhood, for the unity of us all. Even now, my voice is reaching millions throughout the world, millions of despairing men, women, and little children, victims of a system that makes men torture and imprison innocent people. To those who can hear me, I say, do not despair. The misery that is now upon us is but the passing of greed, the bitterness of men who fear the way of human progress. The hate of men will pass, and dictators die, and the power they took from the people will return to the people. And so long as men die, liberty will never perish. Soldiers, don't give yourselves to brutes, men who despise you, enslave you, who regiment your lives, tell you what to do, what to think, or what to feel, who drill you, diet you, treat you like cattle, use you as cannon fodder. Don't give yourselves to these unnatural men, machine men with machine minds and machine hearts. You are not machines, you are not cattle, you are men. You have the love of humanity in your hearts. You don't hate, only the unloved hate, the unloved and the unnatural. Soldiers, don't fight for slavery, fight for liberty. In the 17th chapter of St. Luke it is written, the kingdom of God is within man, not one man nor a group of men, but in all men, in you. You, the people, have the power to create machines, the power to create happiness. You, the people, have the power to make this life free and beautiful, to make this life a wonderful adventure. Then in the name of democracy, let us use that power. Let us all unite. Let us fight for a new world, a decent world, that will give men a chance to work, that will give youth a future and old age a security. By the promise of these things, brutes have risen to power, but they lie. They do not fulfill that promise. They never will. Dictators free themselves, but they enslave the people. Now let us fight to fulfill that promise. Let us fight to free the world, to do away with national barriers, to do away with greed, with hate and intolerance. Let us fight for a world of reason, a world where science and progress will lead to all men's happiness. Soldiers, in the name of democracy, let us all unite!